So we got affect of the internal state built, check. We have cognitions or the priming of the internal state built, check. The last thing is the arousal, and that's going to be a theory by Zillman called excitation transfer theory. And what this theory says is, let's start with arousal. So arousal is basically what you think of when you think of physiological arousal. You think of things like heart rate, blood pressure, how sweaty your palms get when you're nervous, things of that nature. That's when you have those things, that means you're aroused. And in a social situation, what's going to happen is when you're aroused, that's going to increase the dominant response, whatever that dominant response is for you. So I want to, and so how do we get aroused? Well, typically, the easiest way to think of arousal is just go to the gym. You work out, what's going to happen is you're going to have your heart rate's going to beat, or you can go see a scary movie that'll also get your heart rate going. And that's how you would cause arousal to kind of be kicked off in your body. Like your nervous system starts to have these things happen to it. All right. Now, I want to say that arousal by itself is not bad. All right. So I'm not saying that if you go to the gym and you work out, that's going to make you more aggressive. That's not what I'm suggesting. Instead, what I'm suggesting is that if you're provoked and you're aroused, that is what's going to happen. Because if you're provoked, the dominant response that you may be kind of suppressing, the dominant response that you're suppressing may be to hit someone back. And you may be able to suppress that, but when you're aroused, you tend to just engage in that behavior. All right. So this study by Zillman was really interesting. Participants were told that they were going to be involved in two separate studies. Really, there was just a single study. The first was learning, and the second was exercise. And what's going to happen here is participants were either provoked. So while they were practicing learning, it was very Milgram-like, right, where you learn word pairs. And what happened was, in this particular study, is that the real participants, started receiving shocks, all right, from their teacher or from the learner themselves. So they were receiving shocks, and that's going to be used as a provocation here. Other participants did not get shocked at all. All right. In addition to that, afterwards, they were said, okay, we're done with the learning phase. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do the exercise phase. And some participants were asked to do a stationary bike. So that's like a bike, you pedal it, you don't go anywhere, or not, or just sit. So we have actually a 2x2 design here. And the 2x2 is going to be provocation or not. That's this one. And then the exercise or not, that's going to be this variable here. Now, if excitation, and then afterwards, they were told, oh, now it's going to be your turn to be the learner, where you get to shock your partner. All right, you get to be that person. And so the dependent variable was how many shocks do you give. Now, if excitation theory works and it's true, then what should happen is the most aggressive person should be those who are aroused from the exercise and those who are provoked. All right. And what you see, and so the Taylor regression paradigm, remember, it's like the CRT, it goes by several trials. So the dependent variable here, this is going to be the level of shock. And here we have trial 1, trial 2, trial 3, and trial 4. Let's be clear, those aren't trials, those are blocks of trials, so like early to later. Now what you see is over here, let's define, so P stands for the provocation or not. EX stands for whether or not you were exercising. So just like a 2x2 design, you have 4 groups. Now what you see here is, let's just focus on, if you combine these 2 lines here and these 2 lines here, and you kind of follow them throughout, what you'll see is that you have a clear separation here. So if you were provoked, no matter what, you're going to be more aggressive than if you're not provoked. So a main effect of provocation. That describes why the green and blue lines are always higher than the red and black. All right. However, what you see is you start to see this difference. So if we interpret this, the most aggressive person at the very end of the study was this person who was provoked and who exercised. This right here, this is the person who was provoked but stopped exercising. Look at that difference. That is the exercise difference. That is the arousal difference. All right. That is the arousal difference. So it's the pairing of the arousal plus the provocation that leads to this. And that's exactly what excitation transfer theory says, is that we have this arousal that when paired with a provocation, we have to transfer it to something. And it's not catharsis, right? This is something different. This is where you're aroused by the provocation. You have your heightened heart rate. You got your blood pressure going. You got all these things happening. And what's going to happen is that is going to cause you to behave in a certain way. That's your dominant response, right? So what we have now is we have built the proximate general aggression model. We built the internal state, all right? Now what we have to do is the last piece we have to build is this long-term exposure thing, all right? The distal model. And remember, the distal model is predicated on the idea that continued positively reinforced learning changes your personality, and that affects your behavior. And this is social learning theory. So hopefully you learned about this, the Bandura-Bobo doll studies in Gen Psych, maybe, who knows. But what's happening here is what Bandura said is that reinforcement and modeling are what's going to predict behavior here. So let's go through a study that he did in 1963. This is classic stuff, and in my opinion, one of the most important aggression kind of studies that was ever done at a theoretical level. All right. So here's what he did. So what I want you to do is, so these are from his original pictures from his original study. Look at this top row right here. So what we have here is you have an adult. And a Bobo doll basically is this doll thing right there. It's kind of hard to see, but it's all over the place. And what you see is a Bobo doll is basically a weighted inflatable kind of toy where it's weighted at the bottom. So its job is to get punched. And what happens is after you punch it, it kind of comes back to you. So what you see in the top row that I have starred is you see in this case the this adult is on top of the Bobo doll punching it. Here, the adult is picking up the Bobo doll and throwing it. Here, the adult is, it's hard to see, but they have a hammer in their hand and they're hitting it with the hammer. And here, the adult is drop kicking the Bobo doll. And what they're looking at here is, does the child, when the child sees this adult doing it, are they going to do it? Now, they did multiple studies of this. One iteration that I thought was particularly interesting is after the adult beat the crap out of this Bobo doll, a researcher ran in and either praised them and said, good job, you did it just perfectly, or they yelled at them for being mean to this Bobo doll. And what ended up happening is for those kids who were praised, not only were they more aggressive, but they copied the adult perfectly. Like if you look at each column, let's erase that. If you look at, let's just focus on this column here. So this set of pictures here. And what you see is the adult beating the crap out of the Bobo doll with a hammer. Well, look what the kids got. It's a hammer. Look what's happening here. The adult is sitting on the Bobo doll. Guess what this kid is doing? And this kid, right? They're beating the crap out of the Bobo doll. Now, if you don't believe this is true, watch a kid watch a violent TV show. Like when I was growing up, the violent TV shows were like Ninja Turtles, Power Rangers, which are apparently making a comeback. But if you ever observe a kid after they've watched those shows, like the ninja type of shows, these kids will be jumping off couches and jump kicking things. And I even remember when I was older, my brother and I, we would watch a lot of WWE wrestling and WCW wrestling. And as soon as that TV was turned off, what was the first thing we were doing is we were putting ourselves in holds and body slamming each other off couches and beds and on the floor. I mean, it was like, what were we doing is we were imitating. And that's exactly what social learning theory says, is that we imitate what we see, especially when it's positively reinforced. So what's interesting about this is across the Bobo doll studies, this graph right here is supposed to represent across a lot of different studies. What they found is that if the model was being aggressive, whether the model was real, like I just showed you, if it was a video of that model, or if it was a cartoon character modeling the violent behavior, the kids are also more aggressive than the control. The control is when you don't see that aggression at all. None of these three, at least that I'm aware of, differ from each other, but they all differ from this one here. And that's exactly what you would expect for social learning theory. Exactly what you would expect. All right, and that's kind of interesting how that all plays out, where what you have now is you have this modeling. And the modeling, as long as it's positively reinforced, that is the continued learning box at the top of the distal GAM. So now we have that built. And once Anderson and Bushman, what they did is once they started combining these things together, that's when you get the general aggression model all put together. All right. Now, the last piece of this is we really have to ask ourselves now. I'm sorry. We really have to start asking ourselves is where does aggression come from? All right. Where does aggression come from? And that's going to be the last piece of this. And we're going to answer that starting with the next slides.